Coming up this episode, I catch up with James Hart, host of the True North EV podcast, and Ken Bokor, Canadian automotive journalist and host of the EV Revolution show. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to a special episode of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. This episode is all about Canada and the state of electric vehicles north of the border. If you're curious about what's going on with electric vehicles in Canada, this is one you don't want to miss. I want to thank both of you for joining me today. This is exciting. I consider you to be the experts of all things Canadian EV. So really, that's why I wanted to talk to you about what's going on up there, at least relative to where I am, because I expect that you both will know a lot more in terms of the details and kind of the on the ground stuff of what's going on than certainly I do just sitting in my basement here in Richmond. So I do want to give you both a chance to kind of introduce yourselves. It doesn't matter to me who goes first. Ken, do you want to kind of start us off?
Sure. Well, thanks again, Zach, for having me on, and good to meet you virtually as well, James. So I'm Kenneth Bokor. I'm the creator and host and producer, I guess, of a YouTube channel called the EV Revolution Show. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. Since 2018, I originally started with Trevor Page on the Model 3 Owners Club back in 2016, and then formed my own channel in 2018. So I cover all things EV from a global perspective, with the exception of probably not going too deep into China itself, because it's a huge market, but kind of everywhere else, with obviously some Canadian flair. And I'm also a member of AJAC, which is the Automobile Journalist Association of Canada. So I get cars to review from the various OEM press fleets from time to time, and get invited to launches and events. So to help provide my coverage.
Very cool. Very cool. James?
And my name's James. I'm the creator and host of True North EV podcast. Mostly focused on, started off as my own Hyundai Kona electric experience, which during COVID has branched out into interviews and with other Canadian owners of electric vehicles. So more Canadian focused instead of North American. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So I want to kind of just have a generic conversation. But the first thing I do want to address more specifically is Project Arrow, because that is the truest of all Canadian EV projects going on. And so I really want to just dive into what is it, what's going on, and then how important really is that from a Canadian perspective about being a boost to the automotive industry from an electric vehicle standpoint?
Sure. I'm not sure who you want to start off on that.
Go for it.
Well, what I'll add is start off by saying, so it's a project put on mainly by the APMA, which is the Automotive Parts Manufacturer Association of Canada. One of their leaders actually is a neighbor of mine, so I know them quite well. And Project, because they represent that industry from a membership and the car industry, manufacturing industry as a whole, Project Arrow is a partially government financed initiative for us, for a Canadian true all-electric vehicle to be designed, engineered, and built with some level of manufacturing scale here solely in Canada. So using Canadian engineering, Canadian know-how, hopefully a full Canadian supply chain, but they haven't got that far yet. And just to show the world that we have the technology and the prowess to be able to do something like that. Canada, especially here in Ontario, is a big automotive manufacturer. We have a lot of business here. We have, I think, 4 or 5 of the major OEMs that produce vehicles here in Ontario. So we have quite a large workforce involved in producing automobiles in Ontario. So taking that knowledge and branching it out to, with other inputs from Quebec and other provinces to show that we can build this and hopefully set ourselves up as potentially a technology leader to invest in for the EV revolution.
And that's fairly unique because I mean, when you're looking at automotive manufacturing, Canada certainly isn't the first country that pops into your mind naturally. Um, I'm curious, will the experience with somewhat of a harsher climate really, how do you think that will influence or impact the design and the manufacturing of the vehicle? Like, is this something that we can expect will have its own true like Canadian flavor to it?
Well, I know the designers actually came onto, I'm with the Manitoba Electric Vehicle Association. They actually came there and they were actually talking about their design elements where it was, they incorporated like the polar bear, the icebergs. And it's, when you initially look at the vehicle, I don't have that design eye. And then they start like breaking it down and it's like, oh, yeah. So it does have quite a bit of that Canadian flair going to it, but it's attractive and subtle enough that it can be a North American vehicle.
Yeah, and to add to that, there are some uniqueness, obviously, that we bring with some of the things you said, Zach, having to, live in a more colder climate than some of the other parts of the world. So we need to be involved more in the engineering, like things like heat pumps and how can we get more efficiencies out of the battery cells. In Canada, we have one of the leading, if not the battery guru in Dr. Dahl there, I believe, in Nova Scotia, who contracts for Tesla and all these other places. So we have a lot of smarts in Canada around that whole engineering side. And I think we're at the point with lithium ion that they're very efficient and they're really good. So it's just, as James says, to package it a little bit differently, give it some Canadiana flair. Right now we're just seeing concepts. I don't even think they're at a pre prototype stage yet, but they're working towards that. But it'll be good to see some ingenuity. They're utilizing graduate programs at some of the higher leading universities and some really smart people to be involved in this initiative. And I don't think we'll see any mass scale of this. Maybe they might end up producing tens of thousands of units, 50,000, 100 or so, but it's more of showing the marketplace that Canadian has the ingenuity and know-how to be a serious player in this market, and hopefully get other OEMs to look at investing more to build EVs in Canada, because that's at the end of the day really what we want to do, is shift what we do for building internal combustion vehicles over more to EVs. And there may be some announcements coming soon from some of the other OEMs on that.
Yeah, I think you've kind of touched on something that um, is probably, when you're talking about making a car, it's almost like the intent is proof of concept more than
Mm.
anything else, to say, hey, we can do this, versus saying, hey, come buy our car. It's kind of coming at it from a different angle, which I like, because at least from what I'm aware of, there is a lot of really great things going on in Canada that, like I was saying, you just don't hear about it all that often. It doesn't make the news, and I'm not sure exactly why. Certainly, whenever I run across something, I try to bring it up on the EV Resource podcast, just because I like to, like you can, have more of a global aspect. I have tended to kind of narrow that down a little bit to focus more on North America versus Asia or Europe. But it's interesting that you know there's probably one out of 50 news stories that might be Canadian versus something else that's going on in the EV world, even though it seems like there's so much more going on.
Mhm.
Yeah, like even any of the New Flyer buses that you guys have down in the States that are fully electric actually come from our Arctic environment called Winnipeg. They're all built here, tested here. So they definitely can handle -40 weather.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
obviously, for any kind of public transportation, being able to handle that is important, because of, I mean, here in the States anyway, there are a select few places that will feel -40. I mean, maybe in Wisconsin or Minnesota or like North Dakota or whatnot. Um, but if you go north of the border, Certainly further west, in Edmonton and Alberta, and I mean, I know parts of BC probably get ridiculously cold. Um, it's important to have that kind of robustness, I guess, built into a vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Generically,
Yeah.
yeah. So aside from that, unless there's anything that you guys wanted to add to that, um, I want to kind of shift and ask about the Canadian perspective on electric vehicles. And I know, like, down here, everybody just wants their gas powered trucks. And it's a stereotype about Americans for a reason. I mean, it's true. It's like, obviously it's very exciting that the F-150 is going electric. But I'm curious that to get more of a different perspective to see how things are where you guys live specifically. And even then it might differ because I know you guys are, I mean, what, hundreds of kilometers away from each other, right?
We are. Go ahead, James. You started off.
Well, I think we're actually closer to 1,500 kilometers away from each other.
That's about it.
Uh, yeah, but I'm from Manitoba, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. There isn't a whole lot of action going on. We are about 99.5% hydroelectric power, so extremely green power, and we apparently love our gas. So I think it's hard to get even Manitoba Hydro to start spreading chargers, get into the charger scene like Hydro One and other larger power companies have gone into. So there's not really a focus on chargers. So without the chargers, there isn't the massive demand per se for electric vehicles. But when I was dealing with all our vehicles that were in Manitoba, kind of trying to make a list, keep track of what we had for sale. And as soon as one came in, if there wasn't a massive markup on it, it was usually gone in less than a month. So there's a demand for what we have. There's not, I guess, the demand is limited by the chargers.
Yeah, and I think what I'll add to this, so I'm based outside Toronto in Ontario, that it's probably the opposite because obviously we've seen EV adoption grow in the more heavily congested or urban areas. And, the southern line of Canada is about 80% of our population along, not too much farther than the 42nd, I forget what parallel it is now, but the border. So, we're not that far away. So obviously that's where you can make the biggest impact with EV adoption is in these higher population areas. And as James alluded to, with the charging infrastructure, where there's a need, much more access to charging. Ontario, we're not as hydroelectric dependent like Manitoba is. We have a bit more of a spread where we have about 40% nuclear, 10 to 15% natural gas, and we have some hydroelectric, some wind, and some solar as well, feeding the rest of that. So we're clean. We don't have coal or anything, but natural gas isn't the greatest either. So that is something that we're looking at. But the rollout for EV obviously does depend on infrastructure. But now I think, as we talked last time, Zach, that we're at almost at that tipping point, depending on how you define that, where EV adoption is not just this far fringe thing. It's now a bit more front and center. You mentioned the lightning and things like that. So we're seeing it scale up here. I haven't seen the Canadian numbers yet in full for 2021, but I know that we've increased our percentage of EVs. I think somewhere around the 5 to 6% nationally. From a year sales perspective. So it's lower than the global of around 9%, but it's better than some other places. So we are starting to see it, but it's still a long haul to go.
Yeah. So aside from infrastructure, and obviously that's something that it will only get better. I mean, we're not going to see EV chargers, like the total number, disappear. People aren't going to be taking them all away and then, all right, we're done with that. So that's something that you can always say we need more chargers. I don't think there will be a point in the next 10 years where we will say we've got enough. Thanks. Like, we'll always need more. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but the Trans-Canadian charging infrastructure, like to be able to drive from one side to the other, that's only been completed somewhat recently, isn't that right? In fact, James, weren't you and I talking about that like
I believe so.
at some
So
point?
I think that would be going on actually, what, 2019 or maybe beginning of 2020, they finished that up.
Yep.
And so I actually do a trip out to Alberta, which was a little difficult. Well, I didn't even go last year. But 2020, I guess, would have been an interesting year because when I go to Regina, which is all Petro-Canada, they're Trans-Canada chargers. And then up from Regina, I go to Saskatoon and take 16 all the way, where it was extremely hard. I actually relied on level 2 chargers at the end, where now actually Tesla's stepping up and they're the ones putting in level 3 chargers for both Teslas, mostly Teslas, but in order to get some Canadian funding, they're also putting in level 3 CCS Chademo chargers. So it's nice seeing others stepping up and taking place of sort of government private funding, I guess, in order to further the Tesla cause. But hey, it's positive nonetheless, right?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to hear that that's happening in more places. I read an article about that happening in Texas, where they were applying for some grants, and in order to be accepted, that you had to have one CCS or Chademo plug for every, I think it was 1 or 2 Tesla proprietary plugs. So it's great to hear that that's happening somewhere else. I didn't know that. I'm really excited about that because charging, as much as I admire Tesla for the supercharger network, it doesn't help any other manufacturer or anybody else that has a CCS or Chademo car, unless they do end up opening up for more places outside of just a few select areas in Europe. So that is really cool. I'm excited to hear that. The other thing I wanted to ask is, and Ken, this is probably good for you. I know, at least here in Virginia, we don't get a lot of the EVs that are available on the market, or we don't get them right away. Have you found that to be the case where you are, where the choice of electric models is somewhat limited compared to other markets around even North America?
Yeah, we're very similar, I think, to the US in that fact that we tend to get vehicles a little later in their cycle. So obviously, Europe's got things like, a lot of the newer vehicles. I mean, they have the Ioniq 5, they have the EV6, they've had all these before they came here. I mean, we've got pricing now. I think I've seen the first Ioniq 5 on the road that's, somebody's purchase. Even ID4s are starting to come out. So, but we are later to the game. Europe tends to be probably 9 months to maybe even a year ahead of us in those cycles when there are cars destined for more global markets. Some are regional, so Skoda and Citroën and all these other brands that are going to be more European based, right? We won't see them here, Renault, things like that. So yes, we're very similar to you. But I can tell you that one thing I work on, and I'll just hold it up to the screen. It might be hard to see, but this is a listing of every single fully electric vehicle that's available to purchase today in Canada. Now, a lot of these are trims. So, there might be 5 Ioniq 5s on there with different trim levels.
Sure.
But I do this sheet and I also factor in if they're available for our national rebate, because we do have a Canada $5,000 federal program. That's good everywhere. And then there's provincials programs as well in some of the various provinces, not in Ontario, unfortunately, but we might change that come June, who knows? But it just shows that, I started doing this spreadsheet only a couple of years ago, and it was like 10 lines, and now it's like 60. So it just shows the amount of growth that's there. And you and I talked about this before, Zach, about how much choice is really becoming available this year to the North American market space in particular. And yes, we may not see a lot of deliveries, but the availability to pre-order or put reservations and start shipping some is definitely going to happen this year for a ton more models.
I guess just to add to that, Ken is in Ontario. So Ontario probably gets their vehicles about a year before we will see them in Manitoba.
Wow, really?
I
That
know
much of a
in
delay?
yeah,
It could
in
be, yeah.
2019, I was actually preferring the Kia Niro,
Mhm.
a little bit bigger of a vehicle, and I was told if I wanted it, I'd have to go to Ontario to get it, and it would have to be serviced in Ontario. So that's why
Oh,
I went with the Kona. So we still have that delay even from the province to province side of it, and we also do not have any provincial incentives for
Yes.
our stuff here.
And that delay that you allude to, James, is purely a supply and demand, right? Even in Ontario, most of the new EVs, they go to BC and Quebec first. And then 6 months later, several months later, they come to Ontario again, because it's the populace that we have and the buying power of the market that is here. And then they start filtering out to the other provinces. The East Coast is becoming more active because most of those provinces, if not all of them now, I'm not sure about Newfoundland or Labrador, but I know Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick all have implemented provincial incentive programs as well. So that just starts to get people interested in looking at EVs. So the dispersion of EVs is still very regional based on that supply and demand issue.
huh. Interesting. I didn't know that either. So
And I'm sure, and it's similar to the states too, Zach, where you have zero ZEV states and they get like California
yeah,
gets everything first, and then Oregon, Washington, and then kind of filters down to some of the others, and then eventually Texas and South Carolinas and Georgians and whatever get them, right? So,
right. Yeah, I mean, like my parents live in Kansas. There's nothing out there.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, granted, there's not really much out there anyway.
Yeah.
But I think
Oh, it's
that's
a beautiful state. No, it's
oh, it's
beautiful.
it's gorgeous. I love it out there. I really do.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Um, but there's so many hurdles still. And I think one thing that Canada and the US share is their massive size, and as a result of that, diversity in terms of population density.
Yeah.
Ken, like you alluded, like 90% of the population of Canada is within 100 miles of the US border. I mean, it's like then you have all of this rest of the space where I don't I don't really see some of the most remote areas going all electric. Or I don't see the direct path to that. So it'll be interesting in another 30 years when you can't buy an internal combustion engine. Like, what will that have to look like in terms of infrastructure or the dealer network and servicing? That's another thing. How are the dealerships up there? Is it an okay experience to buy an EV, or are they still like there's dealerships here in Richmond I've spoken to that said they will not have an EV on their lot until they're forced to.
Mhm.
Like they don't want anything to do with it at all. I'm curious, do you guys find that to be the case in some places up there too?
Yep. I've noticed that. Actually, talking with one dealership yesterday to try to get a Nissan Leaf to look at, basically would not let you even look at it unless you were pretty much going to buy it. And even with my Kona, initially, when I went to go look at it in 2019, they wanted me to put $1,000 deposit down. They wanted all these guarantees that I would buy it before even driving it. So we definitely have dealers for sure here in Manitoba that are really pushing back on it. Where some of the larger groups here in Manitoba, we have a group called Birchwood Group that I guess from the top down, they're kind of pushing their dealers to go electric.
Yeah, it's a great comment, James. It very much is similar to Ontario. I think we're probably more forward, though, on EV adoption with the dealer networks. Again, some of that is going to be OEM driven. So guys like Volkswagen are saying, that will, if you want to keep selling VW. Cadillac is saying you have an option to opt in or opt out. So, GM's giving some guys options. But I think at some point, this will be much more mandatory because there is an investment for the dealers to make. Take Tesla aside, they have to have electric, service people trained up, certified. They have to put in all the gear. It's expensive. It's a multi-million-dollar investment for a dealer to become electric certified, if you want to call it. So they have to put some skin in the game. And these dealers are franchisees, right? They're privately owned, or as James alluded to, you'll have one company that might own several different dealers. We have that here, one company owning 7 or 10 different dealers of all kinds of makes. But they're franchisees, so they have to put these money in. And again, it's a supply and demand. If there's 2 people in Winnipeg looking for an EV versus 98 that are looking for an ICE V, do I really want to make that investment? So I need to make sure that you're serious about this if I'm going to bring a vehicle in, because I may be stuck with it sitting on my lot for months. And that's, dealers are all about inventory turnover, right? So
Yeah.
they don't want to have stuff sitting on their lots very long.
Well, and James, you had made a comment that EVs are selling rather quickly, actually, right now. Has there been and you might not be able to answer this, but I mean, is there more conversation at kind of the street level with dealerships from a customer perspective of saying, hey, we want electric vehicles. Do you have any? Is that something that people are asking for?
The dealers that I've talked to personally, that I built good relationships with some of their salespeople, said they have way more of that now, especially the more gas prices go up, the more conversations they're having with them about range. One is actually even hearing from the home builders, essentially home builders associations, on what they should be they're looking at building multifamily dwellings, so apartments, condos, all that sort of stuff. What should they be looking at doing there? So the conversations are happening, whether it's supply issues or people looking at it from the top down to how to sell a house, which I personally don't care how the conversations get started, as long as the conversations are there. And it sounds like they are there.
Yeah, very, very similar here as well. And for most of the Canada, it's going to echo obviously a little bit different depending on some of the regions. But, the awareness is certainly increasing. I mean, when you see Super Bowl ads for EVs, that's a game changer, right? I mean, because we all watch that stuff too, or ads during the Olympics or whatever the case is. So there's a lot more awareness being generated. But again, it's still going to be, those people that want to take that step, that feel comfortable. And as James alluded to, more fleets starting to adopt it. When we see, these work companies that are driving EVs, and a lot of them have signed up for it with the F-150, as you mentioned, Zach, with them halting reservations because we can't handle anymore right now. The Silverado, the 12-minute sellout of the first round of reservations for the Silverado EV, which is great. I mean, these, a lot of those are work fleets that were buying into that. So we are seeing that awareness, but again, it's still a slow moving depending on the geography.
And with those work fleets buying them, it also then in turns helps those that just buy used vehicles. Well, then all these fleets eventually get to in the used market, and which then helps those that maybe can't afford a brand new vehicle buy a really good used electric.
Yeah, and I mean, an EV that's only 3, maybe 4 years old. I don't even know if fleets keep them that long. Has so much life left, even at that point. You bring up a really good point with that, James. That the used car market, and Ken, I think you and I might have talked about this. That's where the majority of people are going to buy their first EV. Is they're going to buy it used. I bought my first EV used. Still have it. And I mean, it's a great car. I mean, it's got a lot of life left in it. I'm curious. I mean, obviously, we know extreme temperatures affect batteries much more significantly than somebody that might live in a moderate area. Is there much talk from any aspect about the extreme cold and how that affects electric vehicles?
You start us off, James.
Okay. I'm actually just trying to pull up my Blue Link app. It should be ready in about 10 minutes. I'm over just trying to see my actual kilometers. I'm about 43,000 kilometers. So I have a little dongle, essentially. It connects to the OBD2. It's called EV OBD2. It's actually manufactured in Canada from a gentleman in Quebec, but it actually looks at the battery and all that. So my state of health at 43,000 kilometers in, as I said, we have minus 40 weather, is still 100%.
Ooh.
And in hopefully a month or so, it will be a brand new battery at 100%. So yeah. So they like the cold. It's the heat that they're not fans of.
Yeah, that's a great point there, James. Yeah, I kind of allude heat to brain cells. Once a brain cell dies, it's gone, whereas other cells in the body can regenerate and remultiply. And it's very similar in a battery. Heat's really the bad culprit there. Hence, the early Leafs where they had the lizard packs, as they called, the Arizona ones that were dying for that, and then they fixed it. And I think to note now, though, is that the vehicles that we're seeing over the last couple of years and moving forward are phenomenally different than they were 5, 6, 7. When the original Leafs came out, even your Sparks and these kind of other ones. They're much more sophisticated BMS and thermal management systems that keep the batteries at ideal temps. It's okay to get them cold, and in a lot of cases they won't even let it freeze because they'll have an internal heater and they can come back. It's just that the density, the energy output of that cell weakens when it gets cold. The electrolytes get cold, if I remember my chemistry, and then the energy just doesn't pass through as well as it could when it's a nice 20 degrees C. So cold is okay, and I think listeners and viewers to this should take that, whatever you're looking to buy today or over the last year or so, last couple of years, they're really robust and stable systems that with the exception of the Leaf, which is the only vehicle that really has a passive thermal management strategy, which will still work depending on the use case. But if you're going to do a lot of driving, you want something that's thermal managed properly. They're going to last. So even I sat through a webinar a little while ago with, again, our battery expert there that I mentioned, and he said, like, we have million-plus kilometer cells today. I mean, they're not dying. Like, this fear of that they're going to die, that they're going to degrade in 4 or 5 years is not the reality anymore. They are pretty robust systems. So it's just a matter of treating it properly like you would anything else, anything else mechanical, following the OEM's recommendations for charging and things like that, and just driving the vehicles, as you would normally, and they will last. I mean, as you said, Zach, you've got, a lot of life still on that Spark of yours, but even buying it used. And I think that's a market that's going to see a lot of activity, the used market, in the coming years.
Yeah, I really hope so. I don't know about you guys, but I get really excited when I see other EVs driving on the road. To the point where, like, my kids, I'm like, "Hey, look, there's a Bolt or whatever it might be." So, it's some days I've stopped counting because I'll get 30 or more depending on how much I'm out and about. Um, where 2 years ago I was lucky to get to 10. So
Mhm.
it's neat to see. I don't think I see, other than maybe the Chevy Bolt, I don't think I see very many used cars running around. Not that you can tell whether it's new or used, unless it is a brand new car. But yeah, when the used market really kicks in, I think we're gonna see so many more happy people.
James, I believe that you guys, you're probably seeing that already, as we're seeing here in Ontario and other places. Used car dealers specifically just focused on used EVs pop up now as sustained businesses in their own. Correct?
Yeah, we have one that he's trying to focus on EVs or plug-in hybrids. So he's
Mhm.
kind of branched out a bit,
Mhm.
but just because he couldn't get the EVs, right?
Right.
So, and that seems to be the going problem. Whenever I talk to a dealer, they're asking me how much they can give me for my Kona. They're looking for the EVs.
Mhm.
So, and other than one dealership I can point to offhand here in Winnipeg, all of them sell ridiculously quick. Except for the one, but they're also usually doing 20 to 30% markup over a new vehicle because they focus on Teslas. So, yeah.
Same here, and I'm sure same in the US. It's just supply and demand, right? Housing prices go up when there's more people looking for a house than there is the number of houses available. Same with EVs, right? That used market, there's not a ton out there because people are hanging on to them. They last longer than I think expectations, right? So it is a bit of a tough slog. I know in Europe, I was in the UK a couple of times over the last few years, and they have a lot of industry businesses built up around the used EV market, but they have a lot more inventory to deal with. A lot more models available, as we talked about earlier, that they have access to. So that will be a market that'll get busier and busier. I know in the GTA, Greater Toronto Area alone, there's probably half a dozen or so strictly guys that are just focused on EVs, on used EVs. And it's a sustained business for them. So.
That's great. Well, I unfortunately, I'm not sure why, even though it's plugged in, my laptop battery is dying. So that's why it's looking a little delayed. So
okay.
I think I'm gonna need to cut things short because otherwise it's just gonna die completely on me. But we've covered a lot, and I'm really happy about some of the things that we've talked about, because I've learned a few things, which really selfishly was kind of a part of why I wanted to do this, because I wanted to know more. But then and we know this, having a podcast means that we can share with other people too. So I have a feeling that there's a lot of people that will listen to this that will learn some things that they might not have known. At the very least, just getting more of an awareness of what's going on in the Canadian market and how that's developing. I think there's a lot of value in being able to share that with people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So before we end, I'm going to give you guys a chance to plug your podcasts and talk about how people can be reached, or how you can be reached, how people can reach out to you. James, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my podcast is True North EV. It is semi-sporadic. Just for mental health purposes, it's only on days that I have off from work. And but yeah, if you want to reach out to me for questions about Canadian-related electrics, I'll branch out and say, I don't know about the other stuff, plug-in hybrids. I don't really know a whole lot. You can reach me at truenorthev@gmail.com or truenorthevpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and as I mentioned off the top, so I do the EV Revolution show. It's on YouTube. Just search that, you'll find it. You can find me on Twitter at EV Rev Show. That's pretty easy to find. I'm on Instagram as well, EV Revolution Show. But to be honest, I really don't do much on Instagram. I just haven't figured that one out yet. And I also supplement the video channel and I have various different content on my YouTube channel, from car reviews to news reports to event coverage. And I also own a Model 3, so I do some shows wrapped around that and product endorsement, things like that from time to time. But I also do audio podcasts, so you can search EV Revolution Show on any of the audio players, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, all those ones. And those I get, like Zach has done, I get people that are much smarter than me on a Zoom call and record it and put that to audio and talk about all the different aspects of the EV marketplace, not just the vehicles, but the supply chain and other offshoot areas. And even sometimes owners get their perspective and unique views on EV. So you can check those out there.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both very much for your time today. This was enjoyable, and we should definitely get together again at some point, because I think there's probably about 1,000 kilometers between each of us.
All right. Yeah.
We're spread out quite a bit, and I think that having different geographical areas gives different perspectives. That especially the two of you. I mean, you're experiencing different things in the EV community, because of the difference of where you guys are. So I think that's really special.
Yeah, the EV triangle here. So don't get lost in it.
For sure. So I want to thank Ken and James for their time, and I want to thank all of you as well for watching and listening. I do invite your feedback for this episode as well as every other episode via email to hello@ev-resource.com. If you have a comment, leave it on the YouTube video, or you can send me an email. That's fine too. Whatever you want, whatever works for you. I appreciate your feedback. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, click like, hit the bell for notifications. On the audio only podcast, make sure you're following along, and leave a review with Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the like, however you're listening. That way more and more people can find the EV Resource podcast and learn about electric vehicles. If you enjoy the podcast and feel like I've earned your support, you can head over to patreon.com/EV Resource. Tiers start at $5 or $10, but you can always choose whatever random amount you want. You don't have to actually just choose whatever I put on there. Thank you so much to Rajeev Narayan for leading the pack at the executive producer tier. As a part of the benefits for that tier, Rajeev will get his name read out in every single podcast episode. If you want to listen to previous podcast episodes, you can find them on our webpage under the podcast section or on many of the major podcast platforms. And if you want more EV Resource content, then I encourage you to look at all of the other YouTube videos that we have out there, as well as sign up for the monthly EV Resource magazine. You can find that on the webpage as well. But that is going to be it for this podcast. So thank you so much for being with me, and I'll catch you next time.